It had just gone past the transition of New Year's 2022 into the first day of 2023 at about 2 to 3 a.m. My two best friends, Lena and Maria, and I had taken a 2-hour train to a town called Barnsley in the UK. I had started dating a boy there, and my friends were excited to meet him. We were all 18 and had decided to go clubbing with my boyfriend and his friends. When Lena started to feel tired at around 3 a.m., the three of us made our way to a bus stop. Of course, it was too late to get on one, so we were talking about calling a taxi. My boyfriend was very intoxicated, so I told him he didn't have to stay with us and left him at the club. Suddenly, as we were talking, a man dressed in all black came from behind the bus stop. "I heard you need a free ride," he said with a strong accent I couldn't pinpoint. Already tired and a bit intoxicated ourselves, the idea seemed good at first, and we believed he had good intentions. He asked us where we were staying, and we stupidly told him. Then Maria stepped in and politely said, "I'm sorry, but in this day and age, girls can't trust getting in strange cars." The man looked offended and showed us his wedding ring, which looked very cheap and fake. "See, I'm a married man. I promise I won't murder and rape you like Ted Bundy." The way he said it in such an excited tone made my heart drop. My friend seemed to feel the same as she immediately called the taxi company, but the taxi wouldn't be there for at least 10 minutes. The man sat right next to me at the bus stop, asking me if I was in a relationship in my age. He looked about 40. "My wife works night shifts, and I'm so lonely, so I've come out tonight looking for a new woman." I comforted him awkwardly, telling him I'd talk to him while we waited for the taxi. He told us about his suicidal intentions if we didn't get in the car with him, and that he just wanted to rant to us in his car. Before we could decline, he got up and opened the back door of his car. Maria looked at me anxiously and whispered, "What if he pulls out a weapon?" Anxiety came over me, and I took a few steps back in bewilderment and began spam calling my boyfriend and all his friends at the club. None of them picked up. The man turned his car lights off and was heard locking the doors before yelling for us to come over again. Thankfully, the taxi arrived, and we all jumped in it and called the police, while telling the taxi driver to turn back around, only to see the same man sitting in his car by the bus stop, now with his headlights back on, waiting for the next vulnerable drunk young girls. My homie and I were going on a quick little night walk. We left the house around 9 and walked down the block. I live in a suburban safe neighborhood, and while walking down the road, a white minivan flashed its bright lights at our backs. My buddy said the driver probably just wanted to get by since we were in the middle of the street, so we moved to the sidewalk and sat on the curb to talk. The next thing we knew, the minivan pulled around to come back by us, and my buddy saw 2 people in the car. At this point, we didn't think much of it and continued walking down the road they had come from. We then saw a lady walking directly towards us in the street who appeared to be on the phone with someone. Keep in mind, this street was under construction and was unoccupied. As we got next to her, she stopped to look at us and acted as if she was looking around. As we passed her, she turned around and started following us, still on the call with someone. My buddy kept telling me to look, but I didn't want to make it obvious. The next thing we knew, the same white minivan drove by us slowly, and the man in the driver's seat turned his head a full 180 degrees and locked eyes with me as he went by. My stomach filled with the worst feeling of dread. I had a gut feeling that something was seriously wrong. On edge, my buddy and I made an agreement that if we saw the minivan again, we'd run. My buddy then saw headlights as the minivan turned around to come back down the street towards us. We both bolted to the first street with occupied houses. My buddy was a bit behind me because he had stuff in his pockets. He saw the van turn towards the street we ran down to follow us. We panicked and hid behind a car in a driveway. The van then slowly drove by us going east, clearly searching for someone. He passed us, and at this point, we started walking down the street when we saw him turn around to come back down the same street. So, we ended up sprinting a few houses down to a different driveway to hide behind a truck. We then knew that this was very serious, and we both had our knives ready for the worst-case scenario. As the van slowly drove past us again, we booked it down the road he came from and ran home. We are now home and safe, but still on edge. We didn't know if we should have called the cops or not, but I'm glad we're back safe. Both my brothers and I were homeschooled, so we didn't have regular school hours. Growing up, I spent a lot of time around town at places like Costco, the YMCA, and other spots during school hours. I often encountered well-meaning adults who assumed my brothers and I were playing hooky. Usually a simple explanation sufficed, and sometimes we had to fetch our mom to validate our story to whatever adult had stopped us. However, this time was a little different. My little brother really struggled with verbal communication as a small child and was constantly getting into trouble. As a protective older brother, I spent a lot of time watching over him. For context, he was about 7 and I was 9. One day, we were at a park on a homeschool group field trip, surrounded by a large group of children and adults. My little brother and I headed off to explore on our own, not realizing that the park shared a patch of grass with a grade school. Enter the bitch lady teacher. I can still remember sitting on the swing when suddenly I heard my brother yelling and some lady screaming. I started running, thinking, what did he do this time? I rushed over and found my brother in tears, being dragged by a female teacher from the adjoining public school. Apparently, her class was using the grass field and heading back from recess. The teacher had assumed my brother was one of her students and grabbed him when he wouldn't go with her to the school. I immediately tried to explain that we were homeschooled and didn't belong to her school, so she should release my brother. The lady, who identified herself as Mrs. Davis, told me not to speak to her without respect. I was pretty stunned. Having never attended public school until high school, I was used to adults being at least polite when talking to me. This lady was something else. She continued to pull at my brother's arm very forcefully, even hurting him. I looked around but couldn't find any homeschool moms or older homeschool children who could assist. Several public school children started to say that they didn't recognize me or my brother, and that maybe we were telling the truth. My brother was in hysterics, and the lady started to suspect that I was playing hooky too. She began asking questions like, "Who is your homeroom teacher?" I told her the truth. I didn't have one because I was homeschooled. I pleaded with her to let my brother go. When she reached for my hand, I slapped it away. She gave me a death glare and started ranting. At 9 years old, I didn't catch all of what she said, but she was in full meltdown mode about my supposed disrespect. I was starting to legitimately freak out too. I didn't know where she was going to take my brother, and seeing him so distressed triggered a primal defense mechanism in me. I couldn't let this happen. I looked around again, and still didn't see anyone from our group. The lady continued to say nasty things to me, but now she was taking her class, and my brother back to the school. My time was running out. Then, I spotted a police officer, one of those school resource officers who patrol the grounds. Throughout this whole encounter, I'd been polite but forceful in talking to the lady. Seeing the policeman, I had no shame as a little boy, and let myself start to cry, acting terrified like I was running from Pennywise. I ran about 50 yards to the policeman, screaming the whole way, "She is kidnapping my brother. That lady is stealing my brother. Please save him." I didn't realize that when I turned on the waterworks, quite a few people at the park took notice. As I hurried back to my brother with the police officer, I saw my older brother and my mother heading over quickly from the other side of the park. Someone had seen me and knew who my mother was. The cop and I reached the teacher at the same time my mom and older brother did. My mom isn't shy. She grabbed my brother from the teacher and screamed, "Who the fuck do you think you are? Touch my child again and see what happens." I have never heard my mother curse before or after, except the day her mother died. The policeman stepped between my mother and the teacher. The old bag defended herself, insisting she had just confused my brother for another student. The policeman convinced my mother to just take me and my brothers and walk away. My mom is one of those ladies who runs local communities. She managed the local church women's ministry, the homeschool group, and so on, and she wasn't one to be ignored. She also holds insane grudges and doesn't forget. She found the principal Mrs. Davis worked for and got a written apology from Mrs. Davis, the principal, some state education official, and God knows who else. She also secured a promise from the principal that no homeschool children would be harassed at that park going forward. My brother and I went back a few times on additional homeschool field trips, but we stayed away from the swings.